Richard's recklessness was crippling for the kingdom and eventually fatal for him. As a storybook hero, he always seems to have expected a happy ending and would sometimes even forget to put on armour. And that was how he got killed in the end, taking a stupid chance at an unimportant siege in 1199. A crossbow bolt wound became infected. While he was dying, the man who'd loosed the shot was captured and delivered to him, and Richard carried on behaving as though he was in a storybook, making a great gesture of releasing the man and giving him money. Richard had no heir. He named his brother, the 32-year-old John, as his successor. Richard, aged 41, died in his mother's arms, England's hero king, who detested the country and had spent 6 months of his reign there. And the man who'd killed him was rearrested and flayed alive. His little brother John was never meant to be king. His father had called him John Lackland because there was originally no part of the huge Angevin empire left for him. And the 3 problems that lurked at the core of monarchy in England now became crises. How did succession work? What was the balance between the king and the church? And what legal limits existed on royal power, especially when it came to taxes? To begin with, was he really Richard's proper successor? One of his elder brothers, Geoffrey, had died leaving a son, Arthur, and there were barons in Anjou and Maine who argued that this 13-year-old was the proper successor. They were supported by Philip, King of France. The only way to settle a succession dispute was by violence, so John went to war. His men captured the boy, and he was never seen again. It was generally believed that John drowned him, which was the wrong way to solve the problem. It guaranteed that Arthur would not be king, but it left a very nasty smell. It didn't stop the King of France from keeping the war going, and by 1205 John was driven out of most of France, including Aquitaine and even Normandy. The issue of church power also came up again. It was John's bad luck to be confronted by an exceptionally militant and aggressive pope, Innocent III. Innocent maintained that kings had to submit to popes. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died, Innocent announced that Stephen Langton, who happened to be English, was the new archbishop. John refused to accept the Pope's man. Rome wouldn't give ground, and neither would John. In 1209, the Vatican excommunicated the King of England and his whole kingdom. Back in England, John attempted to carry on regardless. The Pope declared John deposed, and that anyone who even spoke to him was excommunicated. According to one chronicler, John decided at this point to join the enemy. In 1213, he sent a delegation to the Emir of Morocco, offering to adopt Islam and turn England into an Islamic country in return for protection. That would have turned history upside down. Is it true? The Emir, according to the story, told the envoys not to be so silly. In fact, John was reduced to total surrender. The Pope demanded that he submit himself as a vassal of the Church and that England should become a papal fief instead of a sovereign kingdom. So in 1213, Stephen Langton, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, took up his post as a representative of the new overlord of England. In that capacity, he decided to sort out the third issue, the limits of the king's power over his subjects. Barons were now virtually an organised political party. This is the seal of the Barons of London. Langton presented them with a charter issued by Henry I and suggested that they demand something along the same lines but a bit clearer: the Magna Carta. This famous document was signed in June 1215. John and Richard had both tried to meet their costs by massive increases in feudal dues and legal charges, and most of the Magna Carta is an effort to reverse these. But there are also other clauses that show that Langton and the barons thought that laws must bind the king himself as well as everyone else. There was a notion of proper kingship in England, and the Magna Carta tried to spell out what that meant. If Langton had not been an Englishman, the Magna Carta would probably have looked very different. And it was certainly incomprehensible to Pope Innocent, who saw it as a baffling and immoral limitation on the absolute power of the feudal Lord of England, who was, of course, himself. So Innocent issued a papal bull excommunicating anyone who stood by or tried to carry out Magna Carta, and Stephen Langton found himself suspended from his job and recalled to Rome. And John marched through England at the head of an army composed largely of foreign troops, crushing the barons and destroying their property. And that's why the barons went to France and got a new king of their own, Louis, the son of the King of France. And so came the second French invasion of England in 1216. It was about the same size as the invasion of 1066, and Louis landed unopposed. He was greeted with general enthusiasm and was hailed as King of England in a high mass at St. Paul's Cathedral. He set up his own government, and his army began its pursuit of John's dwindling forces. John was assembling an army to stage the great final battle, and was travelling along the seashore from Lynn to Lincolnshire. A miscalculation of the tide was all he needed. His whole baggage train was washed away, including his treasure and the crown jewels. Distraught, broken, he made his way to an abbey at Swineshead, where he was comforted with the monk's latest experiment in beer making, which seems to have brought on dysentery, fever, and death. Louis I and last, the king no one's ever heard of, now controlled most of the country, but the story of what happened to him and how his memory was erased has to wait for the next episode.